You've been performing all day, not for strangers, for the people who stayed. You still can't tell if staying was a choice. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too hard or sleeping too little. It comes from the constant, low-grade labor of monitoring your own effect on a room, checking faces, registering the half-second before someone's expression settles into neutral, filing it, assessing. You have been doing this so long that it no longer feels like effort. It just feels like paying attention. But tonight, in the quiet after everyone has gone to their own corners of the house, the monitoring is still running. It doesn't know how to stop just because the room is empty. And underneath that, a fear you have never said out loud, because saying it out loud would make it more real than you're prepared for. Not that they'll leave. That's not the fear. The fear is quieter and more specific than that. The fear is that they are staying, and you don't know why. That the people who are still here have done a kind of private accounting you were never shown, and arrived at a number they've decided to accept. That somewhere in the last several years, without a single conversation, without a single fight, you became something people learn to work around. You know the phrases. She's a lot. You just have to know him. He's not for everyone. You have heard those phrases about other people and understood exactly what they meant. And you have wondered, in the way you only allow yourself to wonder when it's late and the room is dark and no one is watching your face, whether those phrases have been said about you, whether they are being said right now by someone who means them kindly, the way you mean something kindly when you are trying to translate a complicated truth into something a stranger can hold. You don't have to answer that tonight. Nothing here needs you to perform a version of yourself that has already figured this out. This room has no opinion about how easy you are. No one in this space is running an assessment. You arrived exactly as unresolved as you are, and that is the only way to arrive that is allowed. Welcome to Soulnest. The chest tightness that's been there since this morning. That particular vigilance that lives just below the collarbone. The one that isn't quite anxiety and isn't quite grief, but is something in between. It doesn't need to go anywhere right now. You don't need to release it or breathe through it or transform it into something more manageable. It can simply be there, held in a body that has been holding it for a very long time, in a room that is finally, for now, making no demands. The light has gone the color of ordinary dark, not dramatic. Just the room at rest, doing what rooms do when nobody needs anything from them. Somewhere in another part of the house, or across a wall, or down the street, a phone is sitting face up on a table, screen dark, a draft still open in an app no one is looking at. A message that was almost finished. A sentence that stopped halfway through the word that mattered most. The phone is just sitting there. It doesn't need to be resolved tonight. Neither do you. Tonight, we leave the noise behind and simply let the world exist without us. And yet, even now, some part of you is still listening for something. Still waiting for this to become the part where you're told what to do differently. You know the shape of this moment. Someone sees you clearly enough that you breathe for a second, and then the next thing they say is, "Here's how to fix it. Here's the adjustment. Here's the practice. Here's the 3-step approach that people like you, people who tend to be a lot, who tend to require patience, who tend to exhaust the rooms they're in, have found helpful. You've been here before. You know where this is going. And so the chest, which loosened a fraction in the opening, has quietly recontracted. The vigilance is back. Not because anything went wrong, because something might. Notice that. Notice the way the body rearmed itself before a threat even materialized. That's not catastrophizing. That's a nervous system that has been keeping very accurate records for a very long time and knows from experience that the moment someone says, "I see you," is often the moment before they hand you a plan for becoming someone slightly easier to see. This is not that. There is no plan here. Not because plans are wrong, but because a plan is the last thing this particular tiredness needs tonight. The tiredness you carry isn't from not knowing what to do. You have known what to do. You have done it repeatedly, with considerable effort and very mixed results. You have read the books that were recommended by people who meant well. You have adjusted the way you communicate, the way you take up space, the speed at which you say what you actually mean. You have, at various points, become measurably easier to be around, and the shame didn't go anywhere. It sat very still and waited for you to finish. Because here is the thing that no one says out loud. Every time you try to become easier to love, you confirm the premise. You agreed, in action, if not in words, that the original version of you, unedited, unmanaged before the adjustments, was the problem that needed solving. The trying wasn't the solution. The trying was the proof of sentence. Every attempt said, "Yes, you were right about me. Let me demonstrate how seriously I take that verdict." That is not a character flaw. That is what a person does when they have been given, early and efficiently, the impression that love is something you qualify for. The tightness in the upper chest, that specific non-anxious vigilance that lives just below the collarbone, the one that monitors rooms and reads faces and runs its quiet assessments, it's still there. It doesn't need to go anywhere yet. It's been there long enough that asking it to leave tonight would be like asking a security guard to abandon their post mid-shift without explanation. The body doesn't release a job it hasn't been told is finished, so let it run its scan. The room will come back empty the way it has for the last hour, and slowly, without being forced, the chest will have less and less to report. But there's something else running tonight beneath the vigilance. Something quieter and more constant than the chest tightness, more interior than the face reading and the room monitoring. Something that doesn't have an obvious location in the body, because it isn't quite in the body. It's in the gap between the thing you said and the moment immediately after when you heard yourself having said it. That gap, that involuntary audit, the fraction of a second where you become two people at once, the one still in the conversation and the one already reviewing it from somewhere slightly above and to the left, taking notes. You have been doing this for so long that it no longer registers as effort. That's the thing about full-time surveillance of yourself. Eventually, it stops feeling like a second job and starts feeling like just the way consciousness works, like everyone must be doing this, like the internal running commentary, the real-time assessment of how you are landing, the slight recalibration mid-sentence when you clock someone's expression shifting. Like all of that is just what it means to be a person paying attention. It is not. Most people finish a sentence without immediately grading it. Think about what that actually costs. Not in some abstract, cumulative sense, but today, specifically. Think about a single conversation from earlier, any conversation, and notice how much processing happened that had nothing to do with the conversation itself. The monitoring of your own volume, the check mid-laugh to see if the laugh was too much, the small self-correction you made before the other person even had a chance to react. You were present for that conversation. You were also running a parallel broadcast of that conversation, live, with commentary, the whole time. No one asked you to do that. It started so long ago you can't locate the beginning of it. Somewhere on a surface nearby, there's a notes app with a draft that never became a message. A few sentences, maybe more. Carefully chosen words that were then reconsidered, then partially revised, then left. The keyboard on your phone has learned the opening phrase by now, knows what comes after the first 3 words. That draft is not a failure of communication. It is a record of every moment the real-time editor arrived before the message could leave. Every time the inner reviewer said, "This will cost more than it returns. File it. Don't send." Here's the thing about that exhaustion. The specific tiredness that is not sleepiness, but lives in the same zip code. It is not from who you are. It is from the continuous labor of watching who you are, while being who you are, while trying to adjust who you are in response to what the watching reveals, in real time, without interruption, in every room you enter. That is 3 jobs. No one can work 3 jobs indefinitely without the kind of tired that sleep doesn't touch. You are not exhausting to be around. You are exhausted from being your own full-time observer. That distinction won't fix anything tonight, but let it land for a moment. The specific, almost vertiginous relief of a thing finally named accurately. Yes, that is exactly it. The watching, not you, the watching. And there is another kind of watching that started even before tonight. The watching that happens after the replay. You already know which conversation it is. You don't need to search for it. It's been running in the background since it happened, the way a tab stays open in a browser you forgot about, drawing processing power, slightly slowing everything else. A specific exchange, a specific sequence of words in a specific order, delivered in a tone you have replayed enough times now that you can no longer be certain the tone was actually there, or whether you added it in the 3rd replay or the 9th. The original recording has been handled so many times it has started to pick up your fingerprints. Here is what the replay is actually doing, and it is not what it feels like it's doing. It feels like investigation. Like if you turn the exchange over enough times, at enough angles, you will eventually locate the moment you got it wrong, the precise syllable, the half second of too much, the sentence that landed differently than it left. And once you find it, you'll know. You'll have the evidence. You can file it correctly and stop running the search. But the search doesn't stop when you find something. It just starts over with new parameters. Because the replay was never really about finding the mistake. It was about staying close to the moment when you felt yourself being read and not being sure what the reader concluded. There is a phrase that has probably been applied to you at some point, offered by someone who thought they were being generous with it. A lot, or its close relatives, intense, overwhelming, too much, needs a lot of reassurance, short words for a long verdict. And what the replay is often really circling underneath the specific exchange, underneath the tone analysis, is that phrase or something like it. Whether it was confirmed again tonight, whether the expression you caught for half a second was someone privately agreeing with it, your own name, if you let it play right now in the voice of someone who matters, does something strange. It sounds normal, completely ordinary. And that is the thing you cannot decode. Whether the normalcy is warmth that has become so familiar it no longer needs to announce itself, or whether it is the particular flatness of someone who has adjusted, who has learned to say your name the way you learn to say the name of a street you've lived on long enough that it means nothing anymore. Just a designation, just a marker. Turn left at the name. Here is what is actually true about the replay and the phrases and the name said in a neutral voice. The people who reached for a lot were not describing your magnitude. They were describing their capacity. A person who needed you to be less was telling you something about what they could hold, not what you were. And easy to love, the thing they were measuring you against. That phrase almost always means quiet about your own pain. Uncomplicated because undemanding. Undemanding because unexpressed. You were never willing to do that. You kept trying to be legible. You kept writing the draft, even when you didn't send it. That is not what makes someone hard to love. That is what makes someone honest. The sting of those phrases doesn't disappear tonight, but their address changes. They were never about you. They were always about the ceiling of whoever said them. But ceilings get inherited. That's the part that takes longer to see. The person who first installed yours, who first taught you through consistent and specific feedback that your natural volume was a problem requiring management, they had a ceiling too. This is not an excuse for them. It is simply the architecture of how these things travel, person to person, generation to generation, each one passing along the conditional clauses of love as though they were just the normal terms. As though everyone received love this way. As though the fine print was standard. You learned it early, not from a lecture, not from a single moment you can point to and say, there, that's where it started. You learned it the way children learn everything that matters, through repetition, through pattern recognition, through the slow accumulation of evidence about what happened when you were fully yourself versus what happened when you made yourself slightly smaller, slightly quieter, slightly more manageable. The nervous system is an extraordinary student. It does not need the lesson explained. It simply notices what is followed by warmth and what is followed by withdrawal, and it files the information, and it begins to plan accordingly. And here is what that filing produced. A body that learned to brace before entering rooms. Not dramatically, not visibly, not in any way someone watching you would clock. A micro-contraction distributed across the shoulders and the upper chest and the muscles along the jaw, so finely calibrated it no longer registers as an action. It became posture. It became just how you hold yourself. The bracing is so old now that its original purpose, be ready, adjust, don't be too much, watch the face, read the temperature, prepare to correct, has become indistinguishable from simply being conscious. There is something almost impressive about this, in the most exhausting possible way. You essentially built, before you were old enough to understand what you were building, a full-time environmental monitoring system because the environment required it, because the alternative was losing access to something you needed in order to survive. Love, in those early rooms, had terms. You didn't write the terms. You just had to pass the exam, repeatedly, without ever being given the syllabus. The exam had no final. That's the thing. You passed it today the same way you passed it at 9 years old. By staying slightly ahead of the threshold, by knowing approximately where the edges were, by making the necessary adjustments before the withdrawal could happen. It worked. It kept you close to the warmth. It was genuinely intelligent. And it cost you the thing it was designed to protect. The experience of being loved without the contingency, of existing in a room and simply being allowed to be in it at full volume without the scan running. The muscle along your shoulder, the one that has been fractionally raised since before dinner, since before this morning, since longer ago than that. It learned this posture from a room that is no longer the room you're in. The room that trained it is gone. The training remains. That is not a character flaw. That is what survival looks like 20 years after the original threat. Still on the job, still taking notes, waiting for a clearance that no one ever formally issued. And in the meantime, keeping everyone at exactly the distance required to stay safe. That is the part that is hardest to say out loud. Not that the people who love you have failed to reach you, but that you have, with considerable precision and entirely without meaning to, made yourself difficult to reach. Not because you don't want to be reached, because the architecture that was built to protect you from conditional love became, over time, so sophisticated that it stopped distinguishing between the people who would hurt you and the people who wouldn't. The wall learned its job too well. It kept out the cold and, in doing so, kept out quite a lot of the warmth. Think about the last time someone offered you something uncomplicated. Reassurance, affection, a straightforward declaration of care, offered without agenda, without the fine print you've learned to look for. Think about what happened in the body in the moment of receiving it. There was probably a fraction of a second of something close to relief, and then, almost immediately, the assessment. Why are they saying this? What do they want? Is this accurate, or are they being kind? If they knew the full version of me, would they still? The gift arrived, and the monitoring system logged it as a potential threat. Not because you were cynical, because you were trained in very early rooms that warmth with strings attached looks identical to warmth without them, right up until the moment the strings become visible. So the people who love you most, the ones who have stayed, who have offered the uncomplicated thing repeatedly, who have said your name with the same consistency across years. They are working against a system they didn't install and cannot see. They reach toward you and find not rejection exactly, but a kind of managed distance, a version of you that is present and warm and genuinely glad they are there, but operating from behind the glass of the monitoring, available, not fully accessible, and they may have learned, without naming it, to accept this, to love you at the distance you make available, which is its own specific tenderness and also its own specific ache. The bathroom mirror, if you have stood in front of it tonight, showed you a face you have been trying to read for a very long time, looking for what others see, trying to locate, in your own reflection, the thing that requires such careful management. The face that the mirror shows is not the problem. The problem is the search itself, the decades of trying to see yourself through the eyes of someone who might, at any moment, find the disqualifying thing. You have been looking in the mirror for evidence. You have not been looking at yourself. Here is the most painful and the most useful thing to hold at the same time. The fear that you are hard to love built the very walls that made the fear feel true. The belief preceded the architecture. The architecture then produced the experience that confirmed the belief. This loop is not a life sentence. Recognizing it is not the same as being free of it. Not tonight, not immediately. But recognition is a different position than the one you were in before you could see the loop at all. You built this to survive. That matters. It worked. That matters too. And it is also now the thing standing between you and the clearance you have been waiting for someone else to issue. No one else can issue it. That part you may have already known. What you may not have separated out yet, what tends to arrive as a single undifferentiated mass, all weighted the same, all confirming the same verdict, is the difference between being genuinely hard to be with and being consistently misread. These are not the same thing. They have different sources, different implications, and they call for entirely different responses. But they feel identical from the inside, especially at night, especially after a long accumulation of evidence that the monitoring system has been diligently filing for years. Here is a distinction worth sitting with. There are people who are genuinely, structurally difficult, who cause harm without registering it, who consistently leave rooms worse than they found them, who take up space at direct cost to everyone around them. You have likely met some of these people. You have probably, at various points, been quietly astonished by how little they seem to monitor themselves, how freely they move through rooms without running the scan, without the real-time review, without the fractional shoulder raise that precedes any space you enter. The thing you will notice about these people is that they are not lying awake tonight cataloging their effect on others. The self-interrogation that is the entire texture of your inner life is simply not present in theirs. Chronically difficult people do not generally spend much time wondering if they are chronically difficult. You have been wondering for years, possibly decades. The wondering itself is data, and it points in a specific direction, not toward a verdict about your character, but toward the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding themselves to a standard of legibility that most people are never asked to meet. Think about the message that was typed and then deleted, the one the keyboard already knows by now. Before the deleting, before the second guessing arrived and the editing began, there was a first draft, a thought in its original form, before it was assessed for how it might land, before it was reduced or qualified or shelved entirely. That first draft was not difficult. It was precise. It had a specific thing to say, and it knew how to say it, and it was reaching towards someone it wanted to be understood by. The deleting was not an act of difficulty. It was an act of self-protection learned in rooms where precision was received as a problem. The people who have called you hard to love, who have reached for a lot or intense, or the careful silence that communicates the same thing, they were not giving you a complete read. They were giving you the read they were capable of, with the vocabulary they had, from the position of their own particular ceiling. A complex sentence presented to someone reading at a different level does not become a simple sentence. It becomes a sentence they did not finish. That is information about the reader. The sentence remains what it was. Being misread repeatedly does not make you illegible. It makes you someone who has been in the wrong reading rooms. The thought that existed before the editing, precise, specific, reaching, that was you. Not the deletion, not the managed version that made it out, or the one that didn't make it out at all. The tightness in the chest, still present, still running its check. It was built for rooms that required it. Tonight's room is not one of them. The check can run. It will find nothing to correct. And yet, it keeps running, because no one ever told it the job was finished. That is the thing worth looking at tonight, carefully and without accusation. Not whether the self-editing has been useful, but what it was originally hired to do, and whether that situation still exists. There was a version of you, small, attentive, reading rooms with the focused intensity of someone whose comfort depended on getting the read right, who needed this tool, who genuinely, practically needed to know, before speaking, whether speaking would cost something. The monitoring was not neurosis. It was not a personality defect that arrived without cause. It was commissioned. An environment required it, and a very young intelligence rose to that requirement with impressive speed and thoroughness. You learned to edit before transmitting. You learned to assess the room before entering it. You learned to hold the full, unmanaged version of yourself slightly in reserve, available but not deployed, pending further review of conditions. This was not weakness. It was the most rational response available to someone your size, in that room, at that time. The question that tends not to get asked, because the editing is so automatic now that it doesn't present itself as a choice, is what exactly it was protecting. Not from whom, not even why. What? What was the original version of you before the first edit that needed the protection? There was something there, some quality of response, some intensity of feeling, some particular way of being present in a room that registered in that early environment as requiring management. That quality did not go anywhere. It was edited, not removed. It learned to wait. It became the draft that doesn't get sent. Still there, still precise, still knowing exactly what it wants to say, sitting in the gap between what you felt and what you transmitted. The fatigue you carry, and it is a specific fatigue, not the kind that sleep addresses, more like the tiredness of someone who has been translating continuously between two languages for so long that they can no longer remember which one is native. That fatigue is the accumulated overhead of this system. Every conversation that required a pre-transmission review, every room entered with the shoulder fraction raised, the scan already running, every sentence that went through the internal editor before it was allowed out. None of this was free. It all ran on something, and what it ran on was the energy that in another life would have been available for simply being in the room. Here is the reframe, offered plainly. The strategy was right for the original conditions. It was commissioned by a specific threat in a specific room, and it performed exactly as designed. The problem is purely a logistics one. The contract was never formally ended. The system kept running past the conditions that required it because no one filed the paperwork, because the original room eventually changed, but the body didn't receive the memo because sophisticated survival systems do not simply stand down when the situation improves. They stand down when they are explicitly, deliberately, repeatedly told that the new room is different from the old one. You are large enough now to be known. The room you are in tonight is not the room that built the system. The editing that protected you then is costing you now. That distinction is not a solution, but it is the beginning of one. And beginnings, for someone who has spent a long time defending against the possibility of change, have their own specific texture. Not hope exactly, more like the careful curiosity of someone who has been told there might be a door in a wall they had accepted as solid. Not rushing toward it, just turning slightly in that direction for the first time with something other than bracing. Here's the thing that the long accumulation of evidence, every room where you were too much, every face that went carefully neutral, every conversation you replayed at 2 a.m. looking for the sentence that cost you. Here is what that evidence never actually proved, though it felt like proof. It never established that your volume was the problem. It only established that your volume exceeded the capacity of those particular rooms. This is a structural observation, not a consolation. A fire that is the correct size for a fireplace does not become too large because someone carries it into a hallway. The fire is the same fire. You have been measuring yourself for years against the wrong unit, not against your own range, against the tolerance threshold of whoever was in the room. And tolerance thresholds vary enormously, person to person, relationship to relationship, depending on 100 factors that have nothing to do with you. Their own capacity for intensity, their own history with people who felt like too much, their own preference for the particular kind of ease that comes from never being asked to be fully present. Some people find sustained emotional presence exhausting. This is real information about them. It has been filed incorrectly as information about you. The draft in the Notes app, the one with the opening the keyboard already knows. Hold it differently for a moment, not as the evidence of a failure to communicate, as a document with a specific argument, written with care, containing something that wanted to be understood. The fact that it hasn't been sent to the right person yet is not proof that it isn't worth sending. It is proof that the right recipient hasn't been in the room at the moment of composition. These are different problems with different solutions. One of them is about you. One of them is about circumstance. The vigilance in the upper chest, still present, still running its scan at reduced intensity. It learned its calibration from rooms with low ceilings, rooms where the full version of you generated friction simply by existing at full height. But ceiling height is not a fixed property of rooms in general. It was a fixed property of those rooms. There are rooms, you may have been in some of them briefly in moments you might have filed away as flukes, where you did not have to compress, where the scan ran and found nothing that required adjustment, where you spoke at full volume and someone simply received it without the phase shift, without the managed silence. Those rooms exist. They were not accidents. The specific fear underneath all of this, that no room will ever be right, that the pattern is not about the rooms, but about you, that fear makes sense as a conclusion from the available data. But the available data has been collected almost entirely from the wrong sample. You have been inside rooms that couldn't hold you and treated the experience as a controlled study. It wasn't. It was a coincidence of geography. The draft is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of something that still has somewhere to go. And there is another piece of evidence, less obvious, that has been accumulating alongside it. One you may not have logged as evidence at all because it happens too quickly and too automatically to catch. It is the apology, not the apologies for things you actually did. Those are a different category, appropriate and necessary. The other ones, the ones that arrive before you, have had time to assess whether anything requiring apology has actually occurred. You know the specific face that triggers it, not anger. Anger is legible. Anger gives you something to work with. This is quieter than anger. It is the face that goes from open to carefully neutral in the space of a single second. The micro adjustment of someone who has encountered something they have decided to manage rather than meet. A slight settling around the eyes. A fractional withdrawal of engagement. Nothing dramatic, nothing accusatory. Just the face of a person who has quietly decided to be patient with you. And somewhere between registering that face and forming your next sentence, the apology comes out. Sorry, I know I can be. Or sorry if that was too much. Or just sorry. Freestanding, preemptive, covering in advance whatever the face seemed to be responding to. The thing about this particular apology is that it moves faster than thought. It is not a decision. It precedes the part of you that makes decisions, lives somewhere earlier in the sequence, and fires with the reflexive speed of something that was installed before you were old enough to write the code yourself. You learned, in rooms where that face appeared frequently and its appearances had consequences, that getting ahead of the withdrawal was better than absorbing it. The apology was not weakness, it was agility. It was the fastest available tool for restoring the temperature of the room to something manageable. What it also did, every single time, without exception, without any malice on anyone's part, was confirm the underlying premise. Each apology said in the most direct possible language. Yes, there is something here that requires apology. Yes, my presence in its natural form is a thing that warrants preemptive correction. The belief and the behavior formed a closed loop, each one feeding the other. The belief produced the apology. The apology validated the belief. Repeat. Across years, across rooms, across relationships, until the loop became indistinguishable from just how things are. Here is the separation worth making tonight. There is accountability, the recognition of actual harm, the genuine repair of something genuinely damaged, and it is real, and it matters, and it is entirely different from what has been described above. Accountability is directional. It moves toward the person affected, identifies the specific damage, attempts specific repair. The compulsive apology has none of these properties. It is not directional. It is not specific. It does not identify damage because no damage has occurred. It is, in its honest function, a preemptive request for permission to remain in the room at the volume you are currently occupying. You should not have to request that permission. Your presence is not a proposal pending approval. The face going neutral was one person's response to their own ceiling. It was never a summons. The chest knows the difference underneath the reflex. The apology fires before the chest can say anything. But the chest knows something else too. Something that has been harder to name than the vigilance, harder to locate than the bracing. A grief that is not about any single person or any single room, but about the accumulated cost of a specific habit of mind. The habit of arriving in every relationship already knowing, somewhere beneath the warmth and the genuine wanting, how it ends. Not pessimism exactly. A more specific thing. The quiet, persistent expectation that the people who are currently close will, in time, find their way to a more comfortable distance. That closeness, for you, has an expiration date that others can sense even when you cannot see it yourself. You have probably never said this out loud in those terms. It tends to live below the level of articulation, operating as a kind of background weather system rather than a conscious belief. But trace it, and you'll find it. The slight withholding in even the warmest connections, the part of you that has not fully unpacked, that lives in the relationship the way a person lives in a hotel room they know they'll be asked to leave, present, engaged, genuinely glad to be there, and never quite setting down everything they brought with them. And here is what this habit does to the evidence. When someone is simply busy, the monitoring system logs it as early stage withdrawal. When a reply comes slower than usual, the pattern recognition that was built to detect the first signs of cooling finds what it was calibrated to find. When a friend is distracted, tired, caught in their own life, all the ordinary fluctuations of human closeness that have nothing to do with you, the system processes them as confirmation. The belief in this way becomes extraordinarily good at proving itself, not because the belief is accurate, because it was built to find supporting evidence, and proximity to other people generates an endless supply of raw material that can be read as supporting evidence, if that is what you are looking for. This is the thing that has almost never been said to you. The expectation of withdrawal is not passive. It is generative. It reaches forward into the relationship and shapes what you notice, what you wait, what you file. Two people can have an identical interaction, a canceled plan, a quiet evening, a conversation that ends without full resolution, and one of them will experience it as ordinary friction, and the other will file it as data point 7 in an ongoing case. You have been filing, the case has been building, and the case was never as solid as it looked because the investigator was not neutral. There is a muscle, you know the one. It has been present in every chapter, the fractional contraction across the upper back and shoulders that has been running since before dinner. And within it, tonight, there is a question worth asking for the first time. Not when will it release, not how do you make it release. Just where in this entire body is one place that was not recruited into the bracing, one place that was overlooked by the system, the back of the knee perhaps, the skin along the forearm, somewhere that did not receive the memo and simply stayed as it was, soft by default, uncontracted, belonging to no defensive strategy whatsoever. Find it. It is there. It has been there all along, waiting to be noticed. The expectation of cooling does not make you impossible. It makes you someone who has been reading weather patterns in a room that was never as cold as the instruments said. And the instruments, it turns out, were calibrated in a different room entirely. One that no longer exists, one you have been carrying as a reference point long past the point where it was useful. This is the moment to set down the instruments, not permanently, not with ceremony, just for long enough to look up and see what is actually in the room you are currently occupying. Because there is something the shame has been doing very efficiently and very quietly for a long time. Something that functions less like a feeling and more like a filing system. Every face that went neutral, logged, indexed, cross-referenced. Every conversation that ended with distance still between you, cataloged, retained. Every a lot, every you just have to know him, every managed silence, preserved with the fidelity of something that knows it will be needed as evidence later. The shame is an extraordinary archivist, meticulous, tireless, almost impressively thorough. What it is not is neutral, because alongside all of that careful documentation of the rooms where you were too much, there is another set of memories that the system handles differently. The person who, the first time you said the thing you usually edit, did not go neutral, leaned in instead. Who responded to your precision with their own, who met the intensity without flinching, who said your name in a way that had no management in it whatsoever. Those memories exist. You have them. They are not filed under evidence. They are filed under exception, anomaly, the rule-proving outlier. The shame took them and reclassified them before they could do any damage to the case it was building, and the reclassification was so automatic you may not have noticed it happening. This is the reframe that is not consolation. The exceptions were not exceptions. They were the accurate data. The rooms where you flooded were the skewed sample. The people who have said your name with such consistent warmth that the warmth has become the background frequency of how they speak to you. Those people were not fooled, not making allowances, not loving you in spite of the parts that are too much. They were responding to the actual thing, the unedited signal, and they found it not difficult, not requiring management, but specifically, deliberately worth being in the room with. Let your name arrive now in the voice you know, not the neutral replay from earlier, stripped of warmth or coldness, running its inconclusive loop. A different voice. The one that has said your name so many times across so many years that the name has been worn smooth by the handling. The way a word said repeatedly starts to sound strange and then starts to sound only like itself. That voice exists. You know whose it is. It is not a small data point. It is the system telling you something that the archivist has been trying to suppress. The chest, which has been running its assessment all evening, is quieter now than it was an hour ago. Not empty, not resolved, just slightly less pressurized, the way a room changes when a window has been opened somewhere. You can't see the window from where you are, but the air is different. Someone knows you, has always known you, filed you correctly, without reclassification, under exactly what you are. And what you are, not the managed version, not the pre-transmission edit, not the person who enters rooms with the scan already running. What you actually are shows up most clearly in a set of moments that the shame has never been able to fully colonize. Moments when the monitoring system gets distracted, when the performance review function drops offline, not from effort, but from absorption, because something else has claimed the full attention of the mind and the critic didn't get the memo in time. You know these moments. They may not feel significant when they happen because significance requires an audience, and these moments specifically have none. You are alone or functionally alone, absorbed in something that requires just enough of you that the internal observer loses interest and wanders off. A task with its own internal logic, a physical movement repeated until it stops requiring thought. A problem that pulls you so completely into itself that there is, for some unmeasured duration, no you observing you. Just the doing. Just the being present in the only way that is ever actually present, without the meta layer running its commentary above it. Notice what you are like in those moments. Not what you think you are like, not what the post-event review concludes, what you actually are in the moment itself before the critic returns from wherever it went. Curious, probably. Direct. Capable of a quality of attention that people who have witnessed it in you have sometimes remarked on, not as a problem, but as a particular kind of intensity that they found unexpectedly orienting, like being in the presence of someone who is completely where they are. Unself-conscious in the way that only happens when self-consciousness has been temporarily evicted by something more immediate. Warm, probably, in ways that don't require management because there is no one watching to manage for. That person, the one in the unobserved moment, the one whose chest is simply rising and falling without running any scan, is not a fantasy of who you could become with sufficient therapy or sufficient effort or sufficient time. That is not the aspirational version. That is the most structurally accurate version. The vigilance, the monitoring, the bracing, those are the additions. They were installed later. They run on top of the original. Beneath them, at all times, without interruption, The original is still there, still intact, still doing what it was doing before the first room taught it that it needed supervision. The chest right now, notice it. Not the tightness, not the scan, the movement beneath the tightness, the mechanical fact of the lungs doing their work without being asked, without being assessed, without any input from the part of you that grades everything. The chest rises, the chest falls. That movement is you operating without the performance layer. It has been happening all evening, underneath everything. The breath never enrolled in the review process. It simply continued, doing the oldest job, the one that requires nothing from you but to allow it. The self that exists in that movement is not hard to love. It never required management. It was only ever covered by the system that was built to protect it, which did its job, and is now simply, gradually, running out of things to protect you from. And in the space that opens when a protection system starts to stand down, something else becomes audible. Not a new feeling, an old one, very quiet, that has been underneath the vigilance for a long time without being given its correct name. It is not shame, though shame has been living on top of it. It is not the fear of being too much, though that fear learned to speak first and loudest. Underneath all of that is something much simpler and much older, the need to be known. Fully, specifically, without the edited version being the only version available. That need is not a pathology. It is not evidence of damage. It is one of the most fundamental things a person can want, and you have been treating it as a character flaw for so long that the treatment has started to feel like accuracy. Think about what it cost to carry that need while simultaneously believing that having it made you unreasonable. Every time you wanted to be understood, really understood, not managed, not patiently tolerated, but genuinely met at the level where you actually live, and then pulled back from wanting it, because wanting it too visibly was the kind of thing that made faces go neutral. Every draft that got far enough to feel like almost communication before the editor arrived and the backspace started. The want was real. The suppression of the want was learned. These are different things, and collapsing them together, treating the need itself as the problem rather than the specific circumstances that made expressing it unsafe, is the misdiagnosis that has been running everything. There were people who could not meet you at that level. This is true, and it is not a small truth, and it does not require minimizing. They could not give you what the deepest part of you was asking for. But here is what their inability was actually made of. It was made of their own range, their own history, their own capacity for sustained presence with another person's interior life. Some people find that kind of presence easy. Some find it genuinely beyond what they can offer, not from cruelty, not from a verdict about your worth, but from the simple fact of their own limits. A person who cannot swim is not making a statement about the depth of the water. They are telling you something about what they can do. The draft in the Notes app, the one with the careful language, the half-revised sentences, the opening the keyboard has memorized. Look at it one more time, but from a different angle. Not as the evidence of a communication that failed, as the evidence of a person who has not stopped believing, despite everything, that what is inside them is worth the attempt. You kept writing the draft. You kept trying to find the words for the thing that resists easy translation. That is not neediness. That is faith. A stubborn, inarticulate, frequently discouraged faith that somewhere there is a reader for this particular text. The shoulder that has been slightly raised all evening. Let it drop 1 degree. Not as a decision. As the body registering that the need was never the problem. It was always the size of the rooms. And yet, the rooms have changed over the years, and the body has not fully received that information, which means there is still work being done that belongs to old architecture, old dimensions, old measurements taken in spaces that no longer exist. Part of that work is the one this chapter is about. The specific, exhausting labor of being the sole accountant of relational distance, of running quietly and without anyone asking you to, the entire audit of what went wrong whenever space opens up between you and another person, examining your contribution with meticulous care, cataloging your role, and then, when the accounting is done, carrying the full balance, theirs and yours combined, as though the liability were yours alone to settle. Think about the last time distance formed. Not the dramatic kind, not a fight, not a rupture, but the ordinary kind. A week of shorter messages, a conversation that stayed on the surface, an evening where the other person was elsewhere in some way you couldn't name but definitely noticed. Think about what happened inside the monitoring system within the first 24 hours. The scan ran. The evidence was gathered. The question was asked. What did I do? What was too much? What tipped the balance? And the search for an answer began in the only place the system knows how to search. Inward, in you, in the things you said, the energy you brought, the way you were in the room that might, possibly, have been the reason. Here is what the system did not do. It did not run the same audit on the other person, did not ask what they were carrying that week, what was happening in the parts of their life that have nothing to do with you, whether the distance was the output of something entirely internal to them that would have produced the same distance with anyone they love. The system is not designed to ask those questions. It was built for self-interrogation, not bilateral inquiry, and so it defaults every time to the same conclusion. The variable that changed was you. The face that goes carefully neutral, you know this face intimately, have probably been running its image through enhancement software since the moment it appeared. What did it mean? What produced it? What in you caused the shift from open to managed? But a face going neutral is not a verdict being delivered. It is a person managing their own interior state for their own reasons, using their own face. Their neutrality is theirs. It belongs to whatever is happening inside them, their fatigue, their preoccupation, their own learned ways of not showing what they feel. And it arrived in your direction by proximity, not by intention. You walked into the line of sight of something that was already in motion. You have been so thorough in accounting for your own contribution to every distance that you have been doing the other person's half of the reckoning without being asked and without being paid for it. They have been walking around unburdened by the weight you lifted from them, possibly entirely unaware that there was a weight to lift while you carried double. This is not sustainable accounting. It is not even accurate accounting. It is the monitoring system optimized for self-blame, doing what it was trained to do. The face goes neutral. You note it. Then you set it down. Their neutrality belongs to them. You can afford to let it stay there. And in the quiet that follows that, the specific quiet of someone who has just for the first time in a long while declined to pick something up, there is a question worth sitting with that has almost never been asked. Not what this has cost you. The cost has been named across many chapters with considerable accuracy. The other question, the one that doesn't get asked because the shame is so fluent in the language of deficit that it never learned to speak the language of what the difficulty required you to become. Because it required something. Years of navigating the specific complexity of being you, of monitoring rooms, reading faces, managing the gap between what you feel and what you transmit, replaying exchanges for information, writing drafts that attempt in careful language to make your interior life legible. All of that labor, which has been framed exclusively as a problem, as the evidence of your difficulty, produced something as a byproduct, something that people who have never had to examine themselves this thoroughly simply do not have. You know yourself. Not completely, not without blind spots, not in any way that feels particularly triumphant from the inside, but with a granularity, a specificity, a resistance to self-flattery that is genuinely uncommon. You have looked at yourself in conditions of overexposed, unforgiving light for a long time. You know what is there. Think about the bathroom mirror. Not as you have used it tonight, running the evidence check, trying to see what others see, as a different kind of seeing. The face in that mirror belongs to someone who has spent years in a room most people never enter, the room of sustained, honest self-examination. Not the performative kind, not the social media kind that produces neat narratives of growth and transformation, but the actual kind, the 1 a.m. kind, the lying still and not looking away kind, the kind that produces no audience and no applause and costs something real every time you do it. That room has shaped you. The time you have spent in it is not wasted time. It is the source of the most precise thing about you. The muscle along the shoulder, the one that has carried the full ledger all evening, carries something else too, something it has not been given credit for. The endurance of sustained self-inquiry is not a passive quality. It is a form of courage, practiced so repeatedly it stopped feeling like courage and started feeling like just what you do. Most people, when the examination becomes uncomfortable, find reasons to stop examining. You developed, across years and largely without choosing to, the capacity to keep looking past the point where looking becomes uncomfortable. This is not a small thing. It has made you someone with an unusually accurate map of their own interior. Not a comfortable map, not a flattering one, but a precise one. The fatigue of constant self-editing has another face. Turned slightly in better light, it is the fatigue of someone who has done genuine work in a domain that most people treat as optional. You did not treat it as optional. You could not. The complexity you were navigating required you to keep going back in. And what accumulated from all that returning, all that staying with the uncomfortable question, is a quality of self-knowledge that is rare and real and entirely yours. It is not nothing. It is, in fact, the most honest thing you own. And honest things can be set down, not discarded, set down. There is a distinction that the monitoring system has never learned to make because the monitoring system was not built for rest, was not designed with a sleep mode, has no protocol for the end of a shift. It was built to run, and so it has run tonight as every night through the whole of what has been examined here, and it will, if left to its own logic, simply continue. It will find the next thing to assess. It will open the next file. It will invite you with great efficiency and no malice whatsoever to keep going until the thing is resolved. The thing will not be resolved tonight. This is not a failure. It is the nature of the thing. What has been carried across this many chapters, built across this many years, learned in rooms this foundational, it does not resolve in a single night of honest examination. It shifts, it repositions, it becomes, slowly, something that is carried differently rather than something that disappears. Tonight, it has shifted. That is real. That is not nothing. But the work that remains will be there in the morning, intact, available, requiring nothing of you between now and then, except that you be rested enough to continue it. There is a particular way the mind of someone who monitors everything responds to the idea of rest. A slight suspicion that rest is a form of avoidance, that putting the thing down is the same as dismissing it, that sleep is the act of someone who has decided this doesn't matter after all. This is the monitoring system speaking. It has a vested interest in remaining operational. It will frame its own continuation as conscientiousness, as care, as the responsible position. It is not. Staying awake with the thing does not honor the thing. It simply exhausts the person who would otherwise be equipped to do something useful with it. Imagine the bathroom mirror, the flat, overexposed light that has been the light of this theme's entire sensory world, going dark, not dramatically. The way lights go dark when they are simply switched off. The room shifting from examination light to ordinary dark. The face in the mirror no longer under scrutiny, no longer a problem to be solved, no longer an evidence-gathering exercise. Just a face in a dark mirror, in a room that has stopped asking anything. The mirror is just glass now. It holds nothing. It requires nothing. It will be there tomorrow, and the examination can resume then if it needs to. Tonight, it is simply a surface that reflects whatever is in front of it, and what is in front of it right now is the ordinary dark of a room at rest. The draft in the Notes app, still open, probably, on whatever surface it's resting on, does not need to be resolved tonight either. It doesn't need to be sent or deleted or further revised. It can stay exactly as it is, mid-sentence, mid-thought, the keyboard still knowing how it starts. Some things are allowed to remain unfinished overnight. Most things, actually. The unfinished state is not an emergency. It is just the current state, waiting without urgency for tomorrow. The shame will be exactly where you left it when you wake. It is not going anywhere. You don't have to stand guard over it to prove it matters. It knows it matters. So do you. Rest now. And resting means, among other things, allowing the body to receive that permission, because the mind has done its work tonight, has moved through what it needed to move through, but the body has been in the room for all of it and has not yet been formally released. It has been holding this entire conversation in its musculature. It took the argument about legibility into the shoulders. It held the specific fear in the upper chest. It carried the long accounting of every misread room in the slight forward pull of the neck, the fractional elevation of the jaw, the contracted quality along the upper back that is the physical signature of a person who has not, even in sleep, fully stopped performing the review. The body does not know the conversation is over unless it is told. So, the conversation is over, not resolved, over for tonight, and the body can begin, slowly and without being forced, to remember what it is when it is not being used as a vigilance system, when it is just mass and warmth and the ordinary weight of a person lying down. It knows how to be this. It has been a body far longer than it has been a monitoring station. The monitoring was installed later. Beneath it, the original body, the one that simply inhabits space and breathes and has a temperature and a weight, has been here the whole time, waiting with considerable patience for a turn. Bring the attention to the upper chest, not to assess it, just to find it. The place where the scan has been running all evening, the slight tightness that is not quite pain and not quite tension, but is always specifically present. Notice it without asking it to be different. Then notice, underneath the tightness, the movement, the breath, still doing its oldest work, entirely without your management or supervision, rising, falling, not performing for anyone, not being evaluated, the chest wall moving because the body requires it to, and for no other reason. That movement is the body operating outside the performance review system entirely. It never enrolled. It simply continued. The shoulders, they are almost certainly higher than they need to be. They have been higher than they need to be for most of this night. Let them find their actual resting position, not forced down, not held anywhere, just released from the instruction to be held. They will drop slightly, not dramatically, a degree, perhaps two. The drop is the body acknowledging that there is no longer a room to enter, no face to monitor, no transmission to pre-edit. The room is dark. The mirror is glass. There is no audience for how the shoulders are positioned right now, which means the shoulders can be wherever gravity would like them to be. Here is the mildly absurd thing. The body has known how to do this all along, has been waiting with the uncomplaining patience of something that has no choice but to wait for the moment when the mind finishes its work and steps back. It does not need instructions for rest. It does not need a protocol. The moment the argument releases its grip on the musculature, the body begins, without prompting, to do what bodies do when they are not needed for anything. It settles. It locates its own weight. It begins the long, competent work of repair that requires nothing from you at all. And the room assists with this in its own entirely unintentional way, by being exactly what it is and nothing more than what it is, and having no position whatsoever on any of what has been examined tonight. This is rarer than it sounds. Most spaces you occupy have social weight. They contain other people, or the recent presence of other people, or the anticipation of other people. which means the monitoring system has always had material to work with, always had faces to read and temperatures to check and the micro adjustments of rooms that contain witnesses. But this room, right now, in this dark, at this hour, there is no audience. There is no face to read. There is nothing in here that is capable of going carefully neutral, of deciding to accommodate something rather than engage with it, of saying I'm fine in the voice that means the opposite. The room is not performing any of those functions. The room is simply a bounded space with a ceiling and a temperature and a surface you're lying on, and it has exactly 0 opinions about what you are like to love. The ceiling above you, and there is one, whatever it looks like in your particular dark, whatever distance it sits above you, is not running a scan. It is not logging data. It has not filed a single report in the entire time it has been doing its structural work overhead. It contains you without comment, which is something that rooms do automatically and people find considerably more challenging. You have spent years in rooms where your presence was registered, evaluated, received in ways that required decoding. This room registers your presence only as weight, only as warmth, only as the slight compression of a surface that is simply doing its job. Let the body settle into that indifference, not as loneliness, this is important, as relief. The indifference of the physical world is not the indifference of the people who couldn't meet you. It is structural, categorical. The wall is not withholding warmth. The wall is not a warmth-capable entity. The dark is not the same as the weighted silence after I'm fine. The dark is simply the absence of light, which carries no evaluation and requires no response and produces in the chest, notice it, a very slight further release of the last of the heldness. The draft in the Notes app exists in this room too, on whatever surface holds it, in its unfinished state, its opening line already known by the keyboard, waiting without urgency for tomorrow. In this room, at this hour, it is not a failure. It is just text, characters in a field, waiting as things wait, without grief and without conclusion. The room does not know what the draft means. The room holds it the same way it holds everything else, without judgment, without filing, without the slight shift in expression that requires 3 seconds of internal post-processing to interpret. It holds it because that is what rooms do. You are in a room that cannot find you hard to love. This is not consolation. It is fact. And for tonight, fact is the right kind of company. The dark is just the dark. The ceiling is just the ceiling. You are just a body in a room which requires nothing further of you tonight. And a body left without instruction knows what to do. It does not need to be told to breathe. It has not, in all the hours of this evening, been waiting for permission or guidance or the conclusion of the argument before it continued. It simply continued. The breath moved while the scan ran. The breath moved while the faces were replayed. The breath moved while the drafts were written and deleted in the mind, while the name was replayed at 2 a.m., searching for warmth or tolerance, while the shoulder held its fractional elevation and the chest maintained its vigilance, and the entire monitoring apparatus ran its checks without pause. Underneath all of it, continuous, indifferent to the outcome of any of it, the breath just moved. Notice it now, not to regulate it, not to slow it or deepen it or make it perform rest on your behalf, just to notice that it is already happening, already has been. The chest rises, not the vigilant sensation, not the tightness, but underneath that, the actual mechanical rise of air entering, and then falls, without assessment, without the post-transmission review. The breath said what it said and did not immediately evaluate whether it had said too much. It never has. In all the years of the monitoring system running its evaluations, the breath declined to participate. It is the one system in the body that was never enrolled. There is something almost embarrassing about how long it took to notice this. The very thing that has been the sensory anchor of this theme's specific shame, the tightness in the upper chest, the vigilance that learned to live there, sits directly on top of the breath, has been sitting directly on top of the breath for years, occupying the same real estate, and the breath simply continued underneath it, unimpressed, doing its oldest work without requesting better conditions. It did not need the tightness to resolve first. It did not send a complaint. It has been the most patient thing in the room for the entire night, and for every night before this one. Let the awareness rest there now, not on the tightness, which is considerably quieter than it was an hour ago, but on the movement below it, the rise, the small pause at the top, which is not held breath, just the moment of transition, the fall. Another pause, briefer, at the bottom. The sequence that has been running since before you knew your own name, since before you knew names were a thing that could be replayed and examined for warmth or tolerance, since before there were rooms to read, or faces to monitor, or drafts to decide against sending. The breath has never been hard to love. This is not metaphor. It has simply never presented the question. It performs no self-editing. It does not check the face of the room before deciding whether to continue. It does not maintain a fractional contraction in case the contraction is needed. It arrives, and it leaves, and it arrives again, and there is no review scheduled after any of these events. You are, right now, for however long you remain in this moment before sleep arrives, doing the same, just arriving, just leaving, just the oldest rhythm in the body, continuing as it has always continued, without anyone's permission and without anyone's verdict, just breathing now. And the thoughts, when they come, are arriving differently than they were an hour ago, slower, with more space between them, less insistent about being followed to their conclusions. A thought about tomorrow, a thought about the draft, still open somewhere in the dark, a thought about a face, a name, a question that was not finished. Each one arrives, and there is less urgency now to receive it, to log it, to begin the review. The thoughts are becoming more like weather passing at a distance than arguments requiring attendance. You can see them from here. You don't have to go to them. The question of who you are, whether you are hard to love, whether the verdict is still open or has already been quietly delivered and the people in your life are simply too kind to read it aloud. That question has been the engine of tonight. It was the engine of last night. It will, in all likelihood, be available again tomorrow, running and ready, waiting in the upper chest alongside the rest of what the morning carries. It is a patient question. It has never, not once, failed to show up. It does not need you to resolve it before you sleep, because it has no intention of going anywhere. It will be exactly where you left it, sharp and specific and familiar, and you will be in a better position to sit with it then than you are now, here at the edge of sleep, where the mind is finally, mercifully, beginning to lose its grip on the requirement to conclude. The draft is somewhere in this room, on a surface, in a device, in its permanent state of not quite sent. The keyboard that knows it's opening, the message that has been describing, in careful and half-revised language, what it is like to be inside yourself. It does not need to be sent tonight. It does not need to be deleted, revised, or resolved into any final form. It is just a document. It is in the room the way the ceiling is in the room, present, undemanding, doing nothing that requires your attention before morning. The muscle along the back of the shoulder, which has held so much of this, it is softer now than it was at the beginning of tonight. Not released entirely, but softer. The body has done something real in these hours, even though the doing looked from the outside exactly like lying still. It has moved through something. It arrived at one end, and it is at the other end now, and the distance between the two is real, even if it cannot be precisely measured. You don't have to know tonight who you are. The question is genuinely allowed to remain open. This is not avoidance. It is the recognition that identity does not require constant verification, that the monitoring system vastly overestimates how much depends on the answer being reached before sleep. Nothing depends on it tonight. The morning will assemble itself without your supervision. The question will be there. You will be there. That is all that is required of either of you. The thoughts are slower now, the spaces between them longer, the name not replaying, the face somewhere far back, belonging to itself. Just this, just the breath, just the dark and the body in it, and nothing left tonight to be. The chest rising, falling, the muscle along the shoulder that held so much. It has forgotten for now what it was holding. The draft somewhere in the room, in its unfinished state, waiting with no urgency at all. The question of whether you are hard to love does not need an answer tonight. It never needed one tonight. The breath, just the breath, the chest rising without being asked, the dark flat and complete and entirely without verdict, the body its own weight, only that, settling further into the surface beneath it, the shoulder, the chest, the breath. Somewhere, in another room, someone is reading a message they received today, not yours, just a message, and then setting down their phone, screen going dark, and turning over without thinking anything in particular. Just a person in a room at the end of a day. The body, the dark, the breath still